Will your anchor hold in the storm of life when the clouds unfold their wings of strife? When the storm tides lift and the cables strain, will your anchor drift or firm remain? We have an anchor that keeps the soul steadfast and sure while the billows roll, fastened to the rock that cannot move, grounded firm and deep in the Savior's love. Will your anchor hold in the straits of fear when the breakers roar and the reef is near, while the surges rave and the wild winds blow? Will the angry waves your bark o'erflow? We have an anchor that keeps the soul steadfast and sure while the billows roll, fastened to the rock that cannot move, grounded firm and deep in the Savior's love. Will your anchor hold in the floods of death when the waters cold chill your latest breath? On the rising tide you can never fail while your anchor holds within the veil. We have an anchor that keeps the soul steadfast and sure while the billows roll, fastened to the rock that cannot move, grounded firm and deep in the Savior's love.
Let her loose.
Will your eyes behold through the morning light the city of gold and the harbor bright? Will you anchor safe by the heavenly shore when life's storms are past forevermore? We have an anchor that keeps the soul steadfast and sure while the billows roll.
It'll be another good day at sea, calm and quiet this morning.
Grounded firm and deep in the Savior's love.
It's rather interesting to be back aboard Messenger 3 and reminisce times in this galley, times tied up at the floats. I'm thinking of Percy and Harold, the two men I came aboard with, the personification of the Christian faith. Never ever had met two men quite like they. Now, well, there was a Messenger 1. Not a lot is known of that small vessel because it was a temporary vessel serving the purpose until Messenger 2 came into the picture. It was a sturdy craft, about 36 feet, a little cabin cruiser that served the coast very, very well until the days Messenger 3 was built, 1947. Messenger 2 was then given to the Esperanza General Hospital under Nootka Mission. Well, it was built by Shantyman in Victoria, in one of the shipyards in Victoria. And when the keel was laid, there was a brass plaque put on the keel of the Messenger. It is now fixed to the interior of the wheelhouse The Lord, He it is that doth go before thee. He will not fail thee, nor will He forsake thee. That was back in 1947. The ship was completed. It was towed to Nanaimo for the installation of twin Chrysler Crown gasoline engines by Johnny Rowan in Nanaimo. And there in, I believe, the fall of 1947, it had its maiden voyage in the Gulf Islands. It's interesting, at the turn of the century, clergy in the Toronto area went into Parry Sound, where loggers lived in shake dwellings, shake shanties. They were called shantyman loggers, and they named the clergy shanty boys. So at the turn of the century, when it was decided to form a Dominion-wide work to reach backwoods areas, miners, road construction, railwaymen, they rather proudly took the term Shanty Boys or Shantymen's Christian Association of North America. And from those days to the present, our men still hike the trails, knock on doors in remote areas. That was the joy of my life, to spend my time on the west coast of Vancouver Island. Shantymen across Canada had committees in those days, regional committees, and there was a Vancouver Island branch of Shantymen's Christian Association. That branch, under the direction of Percy Wills, our senior missionary, and the committee in Victoria, took responsibility for all the funding, the raising of funds for all of Victoria, or Vancouver Island Shantyman work. In those days, I was in Tofino. My first week was Shantyman. It was May of 1952. And I was waiting to have an opportunity to board the Messenger. The time came. I received a call from the skipper of the boat to meet him in a place called Dodger's Cove in the Deer Group of Barkley Sound. So I boarded the Cooperator 4 out of Tofino to make my way down to Dodger's Cove. And I recall stepping aboard the Messenger, and at this very same spot sat my old Bible college friend Don McLean. We were both young men, of course. Skipper Harold Peters was aboard, and his partner for that year, his shipmate, was Don McLean, the doctor's son. Don was about to leave for Japan as a missionary, and I was his replacement on the Messenger. Very, very foggy day. That was an interesting experience for me. I was brought up in Saskatchewan, and I was about to learn the ropes and become a young man of the sea. I came into Dodger's Cove in a very, very heavy fog, and it was very, very interesting to be in the wheelhouse of the Cooperator 4 and watch the skipper bring his vessel through the rocks and reefs and into a little quiet, safe harbor. I had met Harold Peters before, but I knew the moment I stepped aboard that this was to be my home and my life. The thing that impressed me most about Percy was the active life of faith and trust in God. He was a man constantly full of praise, full of the Spirit, and it exuded from him in his expressions, in his smile, in his words. I think one of the most impressive things about Percy was his trust in young people. And the confidence he had in you, you felt it, you knew it. Percy was a wise, wise man. He knew how to bring young people up, bring them forward, bring them into the ministry. I remember saying to Percy one day, a young missionary, Percy, I would really appreciate it if you would give us a little more instruction. What would you like us to be doing? Where would you like us to be going? With a twinkle in his eye and a smile, Percy would say, son, I want you to discover from God in your own heart what His directives are for you, for the day, for the week. And that was about all he said. He wasn't wordy, but when he spoke, You knew exactly what he had in mind. You knew exactly what he meant. And you knew his heart for you. And he wanted us as young men, yes, he wanted us to hear our seniors, but he wanted us to hear the Lord of the harvest. He wanted us to hear God in our hearts and know day to day what we needed to be doing. I'll never forget that about Percy. One of the very outstanding things about Percy was he was among the men, he was the greatest servant. He was always responding to need, whether it was to pick something up, whether it was to serve coffee, whether it was to do dishes, whether it was sweep the floor. Harold, one of the things I loved about Harold, I didn't understand Harold when I was young. I thought I knew a lot, and I knew a little. If I said I knew nothing, that would be rather insulting to the staff and teachers at the Prairie Bible Institute, my parents, other mentors I'd had in life, if I were to say I knew nothing when I came aboard. But with gratitude to God for all of the mentors in my life, I stepped aboard to be associated with a man who was selfless. A very, very wonderful person, Harold. In those early days we were pulling into Tofino once, and Harold was grooming me to one day become skipper of the vessel. And Harold said, "Where do you think we should tie up, Earl?" And I thought quietly within my heart, "Come on, Captain, don't you know your own mind? Don't you know where you want to tie the vessel up? Why are you asking me where to tie it up?" But he was just preparing my thought patterns, developing me, coming into harbor, beginning to think, all of the options, the tides, the winds. So I don't recall what eventually happened there, but I do remember that later in life I realized what Harold was up to. And I often thought Harold was indecisive. Why is it this man can't make up his mind quickly, speedily? I came to realize that he had in mind the needs of everybody around him, and he wasn't about to make a decision until he was quite sure which decision would be best for everybody. A young man, I could make a split decision. Might not be the best for many people around, but it was very wonderful having an opportunity to be with the old skipper. Strong man. I learned a lot from all of the men I've worked with on the coast to the present. Now working with my own son, who is my leader on the coast, and the numbers of things that I have learned from Dean. But Harold and I were coming out of a home in Tofino once, and I had spoken out of turn. I have no idea what it was. I said something I shouldn't have said. And on the way down to the vessel, the old skipper said to me, and I was probably 24 at that time, he said, "Johnson, if you ever say that again, I'll flatten you." I've always loved the old skipper. Faithful are the wounds of a friend. Harold was honest. When I needed to hear something, he told me. Well, a typical day would begin often determined by the weather. The typical day for us was early in the morning, if the weather was good. And if the weather was foul, it was probably late at night that we would travel. We often traveled through the night to take advantage of the quiet westerly winds and the calmer seas, and make our trips along the exposed areas of the coast in the calmer waters if we could. But a typical day would probably start for us about 6:30 in the morning. One of our shipmates would say, when asked who got breakfast or who got lunch, And Wilbur James, engineer and wonderful partner aboard the Messenger for many years, Wilbur and Barbara. Wilbur would chuckle and say, "Whoever got hungry," or the one who couldn't hold on anymore. But we'd have porridge, usually a porridge breakfast and some toast. And then, and that was often underway. If the weather was good and we had some quiet waters to travel, we'd get up, warm the engine up, and we'd be underway, and then eat as we journeyed. Of course, it would depend on the area we were in. If we happened to be in a community with numbers of homes, we would begin at probably an early hour, 8:30 in the morning, begin knocking on doors. And that would go on until maybe 10:30 or 11 at night. Lunch or coffee in this home, or a bite to eat in that home, and return to the Messenger sometime late in the evening. There really wasn't a typical day. Some vessels operate that way, 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night. But ours was determined by the needs of the people in the community, by the weather, and we never had a schedule that suited ourselves. Shanty boys didn't